Last night, San Antonio selected guard Stephen Castle from Connecticut with the 4th pick. Months later, they took Kentucky guard Rob Dillingham with the 8th.
TV cameras lined the Spurs practice facility this morning as the team introduced 12-time NBA All-Star Chris Paul as
Wednesday's decision to trade away the 8th overall pick for picks several years into the future had some wondering if the Spurs didn't just put up a brick.
Following a rookie season where the San Antonio Spurs pretty much demonstrated to the entire NBA universe that Victor Wembanyama is the real deal, they officially went into their first offseason with Wemby. At this point, players were on notice. People want to play with Victor Wembanyama. So how would the Spurs construct a team around him going into year 2? Well, there's a lot of rumors suggesting other things that the Spurs can do at this point, but even if they were to stand pat, this team looks absolutely insane. So before we get to the content, do me a favor and double check to see if you're subscribed. We are on the grind to 1 million subscribers and we're really close to getting there. So if you've been enjoying the off-season content, make sure you double check for us. And now that we get all that out of the way, cue the intro. We've been making bank on Prize Picks by playing the WNBA games. I mean, the other night I made $300 and I post all my picks for free onto my Instagram story. And all you have to do to join is go to the link in the description down below and click on the link, or download the Prize Picks app. Use my promo code TheFlightMike to get up to $100 in a deposit match when you sign up. And thank you, Prize Picks, for the sponsor. Mic check 1 2 1 2. What's going on, everybody? The San Antonio Spurs got to work right away. There's a huge question of whether they should select Stephon Castle out of UConn or Rob Dillingham out of Kentucky. And with their very first pick, they selected Stephon Castle out of UConn. I personally was a huge fan of this pick, mainly because it kind of reminded me a little bit of DeJounte Murray when he was drafted by the Spurs. Stephon Castle is long, very tall for a point guard, and possesses tremendous defensive potential, and is already a really good defensive guard. You put a really good defensive guard next to Victor Wembanyama, and you're already spelling trouble for other teams. I mean, give it 2 or 3 years and the San Antonio Spurs are going to be one of the most difficult teams to score on. But the Spurs had 2 lottery picks in this year's NBA draft. And I was saying in the stream over and over again that, hey, for those of you guys that wanted Rob Dillingham, there's a chance that he gets selected with the Spurs' 8th pick. And eventually he would get selected by the Spurs' 8th pick. And the chat went crazy for a brief period of time until a trade was announced. And this trade is absolute insanity. I mean, it's not a bad trade by any means, but it certainly is one of the riskiest trades that I have ever seen. So the details of the trade is that Rob Dillingham, the number 8th overall pick in the 2024 NBA draft, was traded to the San Antonio Spurs for a unprotected 2031 first round pick and a protected 2030 first round pick swap. This is a huge win-win trade. And bear in mind, this is before Rob Dillingham plays for the Minnesota Timberwolves at all. This is before we see where that 2031 draft pick actually falls. But this is one of those trades that as years go on, it's going to become incredibly one-sided very, very quickly. And it really depends on how the dominoes fall. In the case of the San Antonio Spurs, this is a home run. I mean, there's not a single player in this NBA draft that really could help you further than Stephon Castle. It's a very weak NBA draft as well, so moving one of those picks to 7 years later, where Victor Wembanyama is going to be 27 years old, is brilliant. Historically, when you take a look at generational players, Michael Jordan won his first championship during the 1990 to 1991 season. Kobe Bryant won his first championship in the 1999 to 2000 season, which was his 4th year in the NBA, but he may have had a little bit of help. And Kevin Durant won his first championship 10 seasons into his career, but he had to switch teams in order to do so. I think a more realistic trajectory for Wemby would probably be in about year 5 or 6 of his NBA career. By then, you could assume that the San Antonio Spurs NBA draft picks aren't going to be as valuable. Both teams get an A from me because it makes sense for both teams to make this trade. But it's one of those trades that in a few years from now, we're going to look back and say, wow, the San Antonio Spurs made the Minnesota Timberwolves, their biggest rival, that much stronger by trading them Rob Dillingham. Or we're going to look back and say that the Minnesota Timberwolves essentially gifted the San Antonio Spurs a top 3 pick in the 2031 NBA draft for a colossal colossal draft bust. And we're not going to be able to know for sure until games are played and until we figure out if Rob Dillingham was worth this haul. Regardless, I love draft day trades like this. And at the end of the day, it was worth the risk for both sides. I mean, the Spurs aren't really taking on much risk. It's mainly the Minnesota Timberwolves, but I can't wait to see how this pans out either way. The San Antonio Spurs got to work right away when NBA free agency started, making a move that I honestly didn't really expect them to make. I mean, I was originally expecting Chris Paul to go ring chasing in the latter stage of his career, but instead he decided to chase something completely different. You see, the San Antonio Spurs wanted to pursue a high basketball IQ point guard to help develop Victor Wembanyama. And in the case of Chris Paul, he is credited for helping Shai Gilgeous-Alexander's development. Shai mentioned in 2022 how he still talks to Chris Paul all the time, he's still super close with him, how Chris Paul was a great teammate, a great example to follow, especially during that time in his career. And I mentioned in my Chris Paul video, I am personally very excited, mainly because I love watching two incredible basketball minds team up with each other. One being Greg Popovich, obviously one of the greatest basketball minds of our generation, if not the greatest basketball mind of our generation. But on top of that, he gets to team up with a Hall of Famer in Chris Paul, who despite being 39 years old, just what he brings to the table in terms of basketball IQ is remarkable. I think at this point we should just accept Chris Paul as a player that is never going to take the veteran minimum, is going to always try to get his bag. And in this case, it looks like he's going to attempt to pass John Stockton for all-time assists. Chris Paul currently is third in all-time assists in the NBA. He should easily pass the Dallas Mavericks head coach this year. And if he's fully healthy throughout the year and averages 10 assists per game, and he's able to do that for the next 4 seasons of his career, then he might be able to pass John Stockton. So he'd have to play until his age 43 season at that point, but I think he's in a situation where he could definitely rack up some more assists. But even if not, Chris Paul could be a huge help for Victor Wembanyama's development and Stephon Castle's development, and I honestly can't wait to see how Greg Popovich uses him. Now, Chris Paul even gave us an insight into his plans with the San Antonio Spurs when he was introduced as a member of the Spurs.
Man, the opportunity to play, to hoop, to compete. Obviously, this is a first-class organization. I mean, I don't know all the stats, but I don't think I played against another team more than I played against the Spurs in my career. You know, so I learned a lot from, watching this team.
Now, the Spurs weren't done. If you didn't think drafting Stephon Castle at number 4 overall or trading the pick that would become Rob Dillingham for a pick that could turn into a remarkable asset during the 2031 season wasn't enough, the Spurs somehow, some way, found their way into yet another trade. And this is even sneakier than you think. I mean, LeBron James is probably seething at the way that the San Antonio Spurs are building around Wemby, because LeBron's front office wasn't building around him when he came into the NBA, and that was a huge reason why he went to the Miami Heat. So when the Sacramento Kings traded for DeMar DeRozan, the San Antonio Spurs got involved, agreeing to trade for Harrison Barnes. Now, at this stage of his career, we all know who Harrison Barnes is. Believe it or not, he was the #1 recruit coming out of high school before he went to North Carolina. But at this stage of his career, Harrison Barnes is a phenomenal three-point shooter who has a positive VORP, although not by very much. The beauty of this trade is not only do the Spurs get another starting caliber three-point shooter that shot 39% from 3 last year, but at the same time, the San Antonio Spurs once again sneakily found a way to potentially get to the top of the 2031 NBA draft class. I mean, a part of me is wondering, what do they know that we don't? Is the next Victor Wembanyama coming in 2031? Is Greg Popovich already scouting 5th graders and he understands that a superstar is coming in the 2031 NBA draft? Because this team has really targeted the 2031 NBA draft at this point. I want you to understand where the Sacramento Kings could be in 2031. Remember, after the 2025-26 season, De'Aaron Fox's contract expires. During the 26-27 season, he's officially a free agent. He could potentially re-up with the Sacramento Kings for another 3 to 4 seasons, but there's a chance that that could be a valuable pick as well. So the crazy thing about the San Antonio Spurs rebuild is if you take a look at this entire entire rebuild in a vacuum, the craziest thing that occurred during this offseason wasn't even something that the Spurs did. Rather, it's a domino that fell in the rebuild of the San Antonio Spurs. The very first move the Spurs made during this rebuild wasn't when they drafted Victor Wembanyama, rather it was when they traded DeJounte Murray to the Atlanta Hawks. In return, they got Danilo Gallinari, but they also got 3 first-round picks and a 2026 pick swap. The Atlanta Hawks already had the #1 overall pick from this past year's NBA draft, but they also got considerably worse. This team was terrible last year, and now they just traded DeJounte Murray to the New Orleans Pelicans in what was essentially a donation. Respectfully, Larry Nance Jr. and Dyson Daniels and a Lakers 2025 first-round pick and a conditional 2027 first-round pick isn't a good return for DeJounte Murray, but we already discussed this in our DeJounte Murray trade video. The Atlanta Hawks were already a very weak team. And granted, the East is relatively weak. I mean, the New York Knicks got better, the Milwaukee Bucks are still the same, the Cleveland Cavaliers have a brand new head coach, the Indiana Pacers maintained their core, the Philadelphia 76ers got way better. I mean, I guess you could say that the Hawks might be able to be a play-in team once again, but for the most part, it looks like this team is going to continue to trend downwards. So the Spurs essentially positioned themselves in a way where they could have a lottery pick in each and every single season during Victor Wembanyama's career. I mean, his situation is so good in San Antonio that I don't think there's ever going to be a point where we're going to think that Wemby will want to leave the Spurs. It's the craziest situation I've ever seen for a generational prospect, and the only thing that could really ruin his career is some form of incompetence that we cannot foresee, which is what happened with the San Antonio Spurs and Kawhi Leonard during 2018. And I don't even know if that's Greg Popovich's fault or not. You guys could let me know. Or Victor Wembanyama gets injured. But take a look at these draft picks. I mean, next year they have 4 first-round picks, including their own, and 3 second-round picks. In 2026, they have swap rights with the Hawks, but if not, they have their own pick. In 2027, they have the Hawks pick and their own first-round pick, in addition to 2 second-round picks. I mean, you keep going down. In 2029, they only have 1 first-round pick, but in 2030, they have their own and the Dallas Mavericks first-round pick, and that's past Kyrie Irving's prime. So for all you know, Luka Doncic could potentially leave the Mavericks by then. And then in 2031, they have their own draft pick, in addition to the ability to swap picks with the Sacramento Kings, and of course, the Minnesota Timberwolves first-round pick. It's just a crazy amount of assets, and these could be traded for anyone like Lauri Markkanen, for instance, who the San Antonio Spurs are in on, by the way, who'd be a crazy fit next to Victor Wembanyama, or they could just hold these picks and try to develop them alongside Wemby, which historically Greg Popovich has a great track record of developing talent. Either way, I think this is the craziest plan I've ever seen around a generational talent. I mean, I thought what the Pelicans had with Zion Williamson was insane, but somehow that blew up in their face and wasn't successful. I mean, based off of what David Griffin said here.
It's a very competitive conference. And so I think whereas in the past, we've always erred on the side of continuity, and our takeaway has always been, let's see this group healthy. I think we've seen it enough. I think we had some really good opportunity to see Zion play a career high in games. I think we saw it for segments of time well enough to understand that we've got a lot of work to do.
But honestly, if you don't know what's going on with Lauri Markkanen, I mean, this is a trade that could break the entire NBA. So far, there are 3 things that could happen, and all of these scenarios alter the course of the NBA for this upcoming season. I made a whole video on it and broke down each and every scenario. I'll leave a link to it in the end screen in front of you and meet you guys there. And aside from that, I'm your boy Mike, and I'm dropping our mic until our next upload.